Hello, designers and developers, and welcome back to Tacolicious Tacos. We are now going to be starting on the second section over here, which has a nice header image and two prices. We've got some little titles that are inside of here. Again, we are going to be using a grid layout, so I have our larger container right here. This is going to be our section 2. That's what's containing our grid. And then inside of this, if we take a look at it, we are going to have not one row, but two rows. So we've got one up there and one right there. So we've got two rows. And then we're also going to have, let me resize this, two columns right over here. There we go. So you can see that this header image takes up two of our cells, and then we have each of these individual cells with a price inside of this. So let's take a look at what I did to create this HTML. Inside of our glitch file right over here, I have got my div. This has got my header image inside of here. It's got an H1 and an H2. That's our title and our kind of tagline, which is why I gave them each of those classes. And then I've created two divs. They've got the same class. They both are price cards because they're going to have a lot of the same properties with them. And then we have got our price and our item. So each of those, their own little divs as well. Cool. So let's get into setting this up. And the first thing that I'm going to do is really just go into our grid and make sure that that's all good. So we are going to start, let me move this down just a little bit. We are going to open up our section 2. And again, we want to make sure that we are displaying this with a grid. So we're going to do a display grid, and then we want our grid template columns and grid template rows. Woo. Grid template columns, grid template rows. And we're going to do this with the areas. So we'll do grid template areas. Cool. All right. So we know that there are going to be two columns. So I'm just going to start by throwing in one FR and one FR. We'll adjust that later. And then rows, we are also going to have one FR, one FR. Now, the rows are evenly sized, but if I'm looking over here, it looks like this might be 3-to-1. Maybe this is closer to, I don't know, 5-and-2. We'll try it out. We'll see what looks good. So we'll go back into here. Let's just start with 3-to-1. So that's going to be a little bit larger over here, and then we've got the little bit smaller underneath. Now, in our grid template areas, let's start defining our first row. Well, we're going to have our header image in the first spot, and then we're going to have a price. I'm just going to do that lowercase. Cool. And then in the next one, we are going to have our header image, and then we're going to have another price, but this one we don't want the price to expand in between, so we're going to have price 2 because there's going to be two different prices inside of there. It's not really going to matter too much because once we assign the grid areas, they're kind of going to autofill to those spots. Cool. So that's looking good right now. Let's actually autofill this header image. So I'm going to call out my header image, and I am going to give that a grid area, and we name that area header image. Cool. So you can see that takes up that whole spot, and I've got these two prices over here. So with our dot price, actually price card, we're going to set that background. So we're going to give it a background color. I'm just using gold. So I've got gold for each of those. Oh, I do want to space this out the same spacing that we have everywhere else. So we are going to give this a grid gap, or you could just say gap. That's the shorthand, but we should be using the technical stuff when we got the time. And now we got 10 pixels for our gap in between those. Now each of these are we want to center up these, and we're going to use a trick here that is the fastest way to center up something in HTML and CSS, one of the fastest ways, and it only takes 2 lines. and it goes along with the lesson that we've been using. So in my price card, let's take a look at the HTML. We have got two items. We've got this price and this price over here. What we want to do is we want to center those very quickly. So we're going to make a subgrid. Ooh, subgrid. So inside of the price cards, I'm going to do a display grid. And when I do that, each of those becomes a one column, one row grid. And it takes all this content and it places them right there. Now, what we want to do to center this is we're actually going to say place content and then center. And that centers it like this, but if we want to have a height to them, right now we've got this length, but we want our length, we kind of want them to be square almost. If we look over here, they're not exactly square, but we want to have a little bit more height to it. So let's go back into here and let's give it a height. So I'm going to say the height is somewhere around 200 pixels. See how that looks? Whoa, wait, no. Actually, we'll drop that down to 100. That's looking fine. And it's actually going to get a little bit bigger because we're going to bump up the prices font size. So let's do that right now. Let's call out our price. And let's give those, let me scroll that down a little bit, a font size tune-up. And let's see, relatively to the rest of our page, this font is actually almost bigger than our H1, which, you know, that's pretty important to throw our font on there. So let's do 34 pixels. See how that looks? Yeah, that doesn't look too bad. And then burritos and tacos a little bit smaller. And keep in mind that we're also looking this at a preview, so it's not going to be exact how we want it to be until we go and we look at this in a new window. It's looking a little bit better. It doesn't look as obnoxious, but still a little bit smaller actually. We'll figure it out. My display is also 24-inch display. And when you're working on the computers at school, it's gonna be a little bit smaller. All right, so we got the price. Now let's call out our dot item. And let's also increase the font size on that. So if we did 34, let's do this at 24 pixels. Oh, I did a semicolon instead of colon. There we go, that's looking fine. I also want to text align center, just to center up that a little bit better. There we go. They're looking a little bit smaller on this side, so yeah, let's actually change that up. We've got a height. Let's see how 200 looks over there. 200 actually doesn't look all that bad. Now that I'm looking at it on this display, now I want to take this Tacolicious tacos and I want to make this actually look like the banner image. So we've got some H1, H2 elements on this already. So what we want to do is we want to set this div to have a background color. So let's go into that. We're going to go back into here and go into our CSS and let's call out that dot header underscore img. Cool. So we're going to give it a background image. And I'm just going to leave that blank right now because we're also going to have a lot of other things. We're going to need a background size. We're going to set a size for it. We're also going to set a background position. Background position. And let's start with that and see if we need to change anything else. I'm going to go into my assets, get this taco main, copy that URL, and then go back into my CSS. That's going to be this URL here. So we got that, and you can see already that this image is pretty big. Duplicate header image. Did I already call it a header image? Ooh, I did. Let's grab that grid area and throw that in here. We can just get rid of that header image here. Cool. All right, so obviously that image is a little too big right now, so we're going to do this background size. Let's set it to cover. That's looking better. Again, it's going to look a little different over here. Let's contain. Nope, cover. Definitely cover. Cool, we got cover. And then what also is going to help with this, our background position, we're going to set this to center. Cool. Size is still a little bit wonky on here. It's okay. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because it's more over grid than anything else. So now we have got these Tacolicious and relatively delicious tacos. If we look at our Figma design, you can see that it kind of has the same padding to each of these over here and then a little bit on top. So the Tacolicious, the title, I'm going to give a padding of top and left. So that's our dot title. And let's give it a padding. And remember, if we're throwing in 4 properties with this, we're going to go top, right, bottom, left. So the top, let's throw in 40 pixels. Right, we're going to set in 0, bottom 0, and then our left, let's do 40 pixels as well. Cool. So now that one's moved over there. And actually we don't want to do that. We want to do that with margins. So we're going to do margin instead. And that's still going to move it to the same spot, but we want to have a little bit extra space because we're going to change the background to that. So that's our title. And then we're going to call out our tagline. And now our tagline, we're going to set a margin. And for this one, we're going to set a margin top of just 20 pixels because we're just throwing the spacing in between them. And then we'll do 0, 0, and 40 because we want to have the same amount of spacing over here as we do there. Cool. And then for each of these items, we want them to both to have that background color of gold. Cool. They're all the way spanning all the way across here, so we want to give them a width. Let's do a width of 70%. Cool, that kind of fit in almost perfectly. Cool. Woo. Definitely a lot larger on this page, and that is not scaled out exactly how we'd want it to be. So, I'm gonna keep it a little advanced here. We'll do max content. We'll do the same thing over here with a max content. That kind of has a nice aesthetic to it. So it's just highlighting the words, but we're going to add a little bit of padding to each of them. So we'll set the padding at a property of top of 10 pixels and 20 pixels on the side. We'll do that same thing for our tagline. Cool. And I'm actually fine with that right now because I do want to go on to the next stuff. So your grid should be all laid out like this, and that works. You can fiddle around on your display and make it look good. We'll worry more about making it look good on all the displays when we get into responsive design. All right, I'll talk to you later. Bye.